All right. Greetings. Welcome to Dorsey's Resource. We're now going live. The date is Wednesday, February 19th, 2020. The time now is 12:26 p.m. Eastern Time. The title of this video is going to be Key Definitions, Quotations to Research and Investigate in Depth. Something like that I put in the title, but first, as usual, before I get started, I like to give a disclaimer. This video is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. Please understand everyone's individual circumstance or situation may be different. It's up to every individual competent person to please do his or her own homework and research regarding the matter being discussed. This information is not to be construed as legal advice. In the event you feel you need to seek a competent professional, please do so at one's own leisure. Dorsey's Resource Channel is not liable or responsible for any misuse of this information. These are simply my opinions on the topic. Everyone is responsible for their own affairs. With that being said, all rights are reserved. Now, to jump in to the topic, right before I see a couple of you all joining in the chat, Jada Lynn says, hi, greetings to you, Jada. Thank you for joining. Cherokee Olette, Indigenous Aboriginal, says, greetings, Halito Dorsey, greetings to you. Welcome. Thank you for joining, Cherokee. I just wanted, this is kind of a recap before from a previous video. I don't know how long I'll be before you guys. I am on maybe a time restraint. I could be getting some calls. I normally don't come before during the day, but I said I'm going to try to come and give the information during the day versus the night sometimes. But key definitions to research and investigate, please look up the word person. This is basic information pertaining to redemption. Education, I think, is still very vital and important to a lot of newbies out there, people I meet. The terminology and quotations are very, very important. It's important to even go over and refresh and investigate in depth. But please look up, if you have a Black's Law Legal Dictionary, I would say 4th and 6th edition are good if you have like old school, but it's nothing wrong with some of the modern day dictionaries I will research. But keep in mind, they have, in the newer versions, they have an abridged version. So I heard some of the legal professionals, people that are training or studying the bar to go on to become members of the Bar Association, like to become a lawyer, they have an abridged version. So they may not be going as in depth to consolidate and condense everything. But I think it's still important for those who study this unconventional type of information that pertains to being self-sufficient, engaging in contracts. When we engage in commerce, it's very important, very vital. And this is why I'm going over this information. You want to look up the difference between person and natural person. You also have, I encourage you, not just the physical dictionaries, but online, you do have online encyclopedias. I notice other content creators who talk about this type of information are starting to do more screen captures now and actually show how there's credible information online and different dictionaries as well. I encourage you, whatever search engines to your liking, to even look at the different versions of terminology and definitions to compare notes. It's vital as well to have a better understanding of the word, the terminology, the context that it's being used in, by the way. So without further ado, I went over person, also individual. I also went over, look up the definition between the difference between natural person. There's a separate version, there's a separate definition. And I also highly encourage you, if you have access to the internet, definitely do a Yahoo, Google search on these terms. You do have credible dictionaries, encyclopedias, Investopedia online, by the way. Look up the definition of the word corporation. Look up corporation. Black's Law Legal Dictionary, also look it up online. Look up the definition of color of law, if you can find it. Some of these terms, you might need an older dictionary, a Black's Law 4th, 6th edition, maybe even as far back as the 2nd edition. Just to give you guys a hint, they have even some versions you can download. You want to look up the term de facto. Look up the definition of de facto. This is homework for you guys that are curious to know. There's some amazing information I've discovered recently. There's those of you out there that want to know, they want to get straight to the punch. In this movement, so people ask me, is this a silver bullet? Is this like a one size fits all? In my opinion, there's people and the members of the I'm gonna just blatantly say members of the ruling class elite, those who were initiated or given this information. I believe, in my opinion, from my research, it appears as though certain individuals were definitely born into this. Their parents either taught them, they were sent to private schools by invitation only. Credit to Pastor Lindsey Williams as a activist whistleblower some years ago. He put out a DVD called Secrets of the Elite. You still might be able to watch that for free on YouTube. I highly encourage you to watch that documentary if you get a chance. By the way, it's called Secrets of the Elite by Pastor Lindsey Williams. I don't know, I can't tell you if it's still on YouTube, but to gain a better understanding of how certain people are proficient at this type of information and a lot of others. One guy asked the question, why are so many people that teach this information broke or ask donations? And I won't get into all that right now, but I do feel this information does pertain to your freedom. It's very real. I was even questioned recently, and there's nothing wrong with this, because I even hold myself to scrutiny, because you want to have transparency, checks and balances, like the previous video when I got on people that try to discredit this type of information from not being real, but they hide behind shield, fake, or ghost accounts, but they want you to believe that they're credible or their facts matter. I do understand everyone has to make their own assessment and judgment in evaluating this type of information, but I've had people come to me privately and up front that like the type of information, the way that I break it down and share it, and they feel like there's a sense of trust that's there. But I want to encourage you, the reason I'm doing this video is to definitely please do your own homework and research as a backup, so you will see that what I'm saying, don't just take my word for what I'm saying as valid, reputable. I encourage you to look it up for yourself, and you will see the validity down the road. Especially, it might take a while if you research this in depth, and it's a reason I go over this for newbies or people that don't believe this information is real. By the way, Edward G. Griffin that wrote a book, and also there was an audio on the creature from Jekyll Island. I encourage you, he was highly accurate. There was someone out there, a particular gatekeeper, that tried to discredit his information. No, Edward G. Griffin, the creature from Jekyll Island, if you can still research it online. And some of these things I'll bring up, if you can't find it, in general, sometimes they have documentaries. You can always Google or do a Yahoo search. This is how a good researcher, investigator investigates information to find out validity. And there are other private search engines out there, DuckDuckGo, because I understand some people mention about the censorship and things, and that is real. There's a whistleblower that has come out from Google, as well as others that have confirmation that is going on, and they don't want you waking up to the truth. They want to keep you dumbed down, brainwashed, dumbified, and stupefied. Literally, couple of the words may not be actual terms, but you guys get what I mean. They want to keep you in the dark. There's some things I'm not going to go as in depth with, but to get back on topic, by the way, I went over, I mentioned de facto plausible deniability. Look up that term, plausible deniability. You want to look up, I mentioned corporation, also juristic person. You want to look up the definition of juristic person. You want to please look up the definition of estate. And I would advise you, if you look up the definition of estate, look up executor. I just looked it up earlier, the definition of executor. Look up executor, is highly important. You want to get familiarized with these terms, especially if you're getting into trust law, if you're learning about trust, statutory versus non-statutory. You have a public side versus a private side version. You want to look up straw man. This is the general term, yes, straw man. And you want to look up the comparison between the in lingus. If you know how it's spelled, you go back. I did a couple videos ago. I had a discussion on the topic of the in lingus, and I put in the description of the title, that's how it's spelled. You can also look up, that's an actual legal term. By the way, you can look up in the Black's Law Dictionary, not only there, but also online, because in the court system, they use terminology called legalese. This was done on purpose, by the way. This is one of the reasons, in my opinion, I did give a disclaimer where I believe they took Latin out the school system. Some other people I heard mention because they wanted to keep the general population, masses, suppressed and from learning. And people ask, why is this information, seems so unconventional? Sometimes it seems like things don't work because it's literally private. But when you understand the terminology, you can go from bondage to freedom. But there's even a trick with the word freedom. If you break freedom down, freedom, you want to be free because you don't want to be free and dumb. See, there's a play on the words. Library, a lot of people, I learned years ago in etymology, when you get into the etymology of some of these words, don't quote me on it. However, this was going over some years ago. Library means to lie and bury the truth. Library. Think about the root words, where these words in the etymology. You want to look up and research even the root part of the word in the etymology, the suffixes behind these terms that we often use. A friend of mine that gets into esoteric and study eschatology will even go further back to sometimes how when we mention certain words, we're casting spells. Like when we say good morning, I try to say greetings, but I understand some people don't know we're not in mourning. Mourning means to be sad, but you could be passing curses on people just by the words you use, or spells. Because years ago, when you get into the history in depth, they practice magic and use spells, by the way. They cast spells. Because a lot of these concepts, despite what this particular gatekeeper was trying to say, that these terms like capitis diminutio maxima actually was used in Roman law. And it referred to capitis diminutio maxima. You can look that term up. It goes back to Roman law. In whole, it meant either in whole or part of a person's former status or legal capacity. There were 3 changes or 3 conditions of state. And notice on tombstones, when people died, their name was put in all caps. So you can associate that with straw man and in lingus. Capitis diminutio maxima is when it's in all caps versus capitis diminutio minima, meaning lowercase. And these have legal implications, by the way, to how you sign your signature. By the way, I have some notes with me that I'm reading from, just so you all know, by the way, when you see me looking down, I'm also at my other gig, as I refer to as the slavery plantation. And yes, and some of you all may wonder, I can touch on it, why are you still working a job? Yes, job is an acronym for just over broke, some may say. But there is, some things I can touch on, and there's reasons, some things I don't go in depth about, by the way, and trying to obtain true freedom. There's processes, procedures you have to go through until you're totally free. And then there's other levels, higher levels, where you want to be protected, where some of you all may have heard about the do not detain list. Contrary to popular belief, there are those who say it doesn't exist. Some may associate it with diplomatic immunity. I do have a video, 2 videos down the road that I plan on uploading, but I would have to put the Fair Use Act in to show. It was one video was reported on by the local news. Another video I got off of YouTube some years ago, and it will validate that the diplomatic and immunity and do not detain lists do exist and are real, by the way. Just wanted to share that and make you guys aware, contrary to popular belief. But I did give a disclaimer, so you're going to have to do your research, and I can't force people to believe. I'm not trying to force my beliefs, because someone did bring up earlier, and I want to go into, this is a good question, and I said we need checks and balances, so I will hold myself accountable. They asked me, some people want to know, well, what processes have you done that have you've been successful with? And I have gone over a few things in the past without going as in depth about my personal business, but I will say I met some so-called gurus years ago. These were people who were like advanced in this type of information when I first was learning and studying. And I heard about the names before I met one guy. He was popular around the city that I'm in, around the state, and he was actually paid by a group of people to go to Chicago, Illinois. He told me at the time they would put him up in a hotel. He was very proficient with the law, very heavy with battling judges in the court. He said he almost even had something done with the state police in the state of Michigan. but he said the judge put something like failure to state a claim where relief can be granted or something to that effect. I mean, this guy was heavy in the court. He was explaining to me the case and what he was trying to do. And years later, we found out about other things, high-level advanced stuff about different jurisdictions and pertaining to status, by the way, that some of you all may have famously heard status correction. Status correction is real, but getting back to a lot of this information is related to the court system. I did a previous video and showed how it's hidden and encrypted even within certain college classes, because the straw man, which in the court system is called the in lingus, they have plausible deniability, which is one of the terms that I went over to look up. I'm kind of giving you guys some jewels secretly. That's like a legal loophole they have where they can not or act like they don't recognize what you're talking about. But there's a way to still hold their feet to the fire when you do know how to file paperwork correctly, when you are proficient with court paperwork such as summons and complaints, for example, motions, briefs, summaries, stuff like that. By the way, by no means am I a legal expert, but I'm just kind of going over. I've been around the block. I've actually talked to people privately who shared a story when I first got in this movement years ago. Kudos to one brother in particular, brother Del Rico. By the way, I won't say his full name to protect his identity, but he shared a lot of his experiences and was actually, when he shared with me privately, placed on a form of a local do not detain list. So I knew the do not detain list was real years ago. When sometimes people ask me validity, how do I know that this was real? When certain people came out teaching or sharing information about it, I was already aware, but I just wasn't as advanced as other people out there are at different levels in this. And there's also different processes, different procedures. I'm going over this so you guys will understand, have better clarification for those of you all who study this type of information or not familiar with. So I went over capitis diminution maxima. There is a relation. You're doing business as the straw man, the in lingus, in the court system is referred to as the in lingus. They also will say legal person. A legal person is also an account. I did a previous video you want to watch. My more recent videos, I've been going heavy in redemption education, proper education. By the way, that's important. And look up the terms. This is a Latin term that's used. You can look it up. It's in the Black's Law Dictionary. You can also look it up online. Latin civilitur mortis is the loss of all or almost of all civil rights. It's referred to as civil death, by the way, in the courts. Civilitur is Latin term civilitur mortis, and it's spelled, and I have it in a previous title if you're wondering how it's spelled, by the way, of a previous video. You have debits and credits, so this gets into accounting. By the way, I mentioned a friend of mine's wife gave me her accounting workbook some years ago. By the way, she kept the hardback book, which I skimmed through recently, not too long ago, and they talked about marketable and non-marketable securities, which gets into a certain type of field, by the way, where people who go into finance or certain professions that deal with trading or selling stocks are also referred to as securities. I have a friend years ago, I woke him up to this information and I was able to share it. He was a very highly intelligent individual, one of the smartest people I know. And in my opinion, I believe one of the smartest people in the world. He told me he took an IQ test some years ago and had a very high score. By the way, one of my best friends, he no longer lives in this state, by the way, but he at one time had a Series 63 license. And if any of you all know Series 7, excuse me, not just the Series 63, he also mentioned he had a Series 7. If any of you all know about stocks and Series 7 license, check out that movie that came out some years ago. It was called, what was the name of that movie? With the actor Will Smith. He played a real life guy named, trying to think of the guy's name. I can't remember his real name, legal name. I think Gardner was part of his real name. Don't quote me on it, but you might have to look up the movies that Will Smith is played in. And this guy, he struggled like as a homeless person to raise his son, but he went into a field that was related to like trading and dealing with stocks, and he eventually, it's based on a true story, and he was one of a few African American men at the time. He eventually started his own firm, by the way, his own trading firm. I think he eventually sold it, and he became a multi-millionaire. He's still wealthy, I believe, to this day. I think his name was Chris Gardner. Don't quote me on it. By the way, I'm trying to think of the name of that movie, but I think it's important. But I had a friend in real life, by the way, and I won't go into his background to protect his identity, but he shared with me some information that he used to work for a sports team owner here who was very famous, who passed away unfortunately some years ago, that owned several sports teams in the city that I'm in, and some also a restaurant franchise. He used to manage his stocks money for him personally, by the way. Good friend of mine, and he told me, he shared with me his credentials, and a Series 7 is very prestigious, by the way, if you look into that. But he also worked with mortgages. This is in real estate, you know, like in the flip home, stuff like that. I don't know a lot about that type of stuff. When I got in this movement, I was very young at the time, and I hadn't had a background in business. This is why I'm still trying to play catch up, that I'm strong in one area, but maybe weak in others, but I was able to connect the pieces. But to make a long story short, and sharing this information, this story, he was able to empower myself. When I woke him up to this information dealing with the redemption years ago, the private side, he was able to explain to me about registered securities. And I was able to connect how years later that there was a gatekeeper out there that tried to say the birth certificate was not a registered security. And I got confirmation from another source. It is a form of a security, registered securities instrument. You have my friend's wife's, reason I brought her up, the accounting book, where this gets into finance accounting, which is related because this is into banking. You have marketable and non-marketable securities. I think, don't quote me on it, the birth certificate might be classified as a private issue government security. I had another friend, he got confirmation from a book, by the way. It's a private issue government security, by the way. Gosh, I'm still trying to think of the name of that movie. I think it's like right at the tip of my tongue. But I'm gonna go to the chat. I think some other people may have joined or chimed in. Cherokee says etymology, indeed, yes. Yes, as well. Etymology is important. I also want to make a note. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine about this information and how you're going to come across this down the road. And I will say that this particular discipline, he refers to how different people have different disciplines. And this discipline is related, like he's into like prepping or survivalism, prepping, and it overlaps with so-called, what they call so-called sovereign citizen, which I don't use that term, by the way. Once again, to clarify, that's an umbrella term that's used to discredit this type of information, discredit people looking into this type of information, because they want people to think that this information is a scam, or these people that share this stuff are conspiracy theorists. I talk about the legitimate side, the credible stuff. I don't talk about or get into, I think you have people who are less informed out there. That they're, like I explained earlier, there's people at different levels in this. People at lower levels, people who may have been accused of tying up the courts. My friend obviously noticed, he said he even thought those are people who are less informed. You know, have, you know, minute legal background, or read a few things online and just think they're expert overnight. You can't be a weekend warrior, as the military used to tell me years ago when I was considering signing up for the reserves, and some of the active duty full-time members would say, oh, you just want to be a weekend warrior. That's where I get that term from. But this information, you have to study this in depth. What I was explaining, that this information is tied in, it deals with the commercial side of how you engage in business contracts, which you have to do in life anyway. You know, we all have to earn a living. However, you know, everyone goes about doing it is different. But I said this will not hurt you in learning this information. I understand there's apprehension, which leads me to how one of my subscribers who questioned me about, which I'll piggyback to, asked me, what have I done? What have I had successes with? And I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but to tie this in, without putting all my business out there, there was a YouTuber. I'm gonna give an example. His channel is called Akimel. Go there and check him out. I recommend even purchase, if you can, his webinars. Is important to get new study material. By the way, very, very important, I think, to stay abreast, because things change in the movement. They update. By the way, it's a good brother. There's different processes. So you have to determine at the end of the day, you have to evaluate. You know, I can't make the decision for you. Others, you have to make your own assessment. This is why I give a disclaimer. If this is something for you, I would say this type of information is not for the weak. This is unconventional information. However, it is real. The only people that I identified that may have the silver bullet or the A through Z process are members of the ruling class elite or insiders who are private, and it's up to them if they're willing to expose themselves to share this with you, because they're going to evaluate you first before they're going to, you know, go in depth. Because most people want to just, you know, get there and say, what's the secret sauce or whatever. But I'm kind of giving you that anyway. There's another way, as they say, to skin a cat, or to learn this type of information and become proficient in this, by the way, and this study material. But successes, I would say, check out this video that he did dealing with the taxes, Title 26, Section 3402. I won't go into the details, but I did something like this years ago with the previous company that I worked for, and it went through. I was already familiar with it, but you want to research that. And with that, I'm going to give you something else to research. It's important. This gatekeeper out here tried to say that this wasn't true, but look up title in reference to, because these codes are copywritten under the statutory side, Title 28, Section 3002, subsection 15. Look up Part C of that subsection. Title 28, Section 3002, subsection 15A. You can Google this online. It states you unequivocally, it will show you the United States is a federal corporation. Unequivocally, it states this, by the way. And this is why I went over, look up the term corporation, by the way, and the difference between individual person and natural person, by the way. And you want to look that up. Look up juristic person, a state. I went over that, and the relation to the interlingus. I went over capitis diminutio maxima. But without putting my business out there, I'm kind of speaking cryptically. If you connect the dots, when I mentioned I did so, I successfully accomplished that, and I wrote in all rights reserved, dealing with this same particular gatekeeper I'm referring to. I won't. Sometimes I'll say the name. Sometimes I tried to state that UCC 1-308. It was actually updated. It used to be formerly UCC 1-207. And it was updated to 1-308, and some people believe that was done because so many people were using the 1-207, and there may have been some people that were using it improperly out of the wrong context. But what it meant, the definition, and it's codified in reference to, in the state that I'm in, Michigan law, MCL 440.1308. It's for reservation of rights. It states that in connection with my signature, I have reserved my common law right not to be compelled to perform under any unrevealed contract or commercial agreement that I did not enter into knowingly, voluntarily, and intentionally. And furthermore, I do not accept the compelled benefit of any unrevealed contract or commercial agreement that I did not enter into knowingly, voluntarily, and intentionally. That's what that full definition of that code or that statute referred to. It's also in Ohio statutes, my birth state, by the way. I looked up down there in the Ohio revised codes. There's a version down there. You have to look up. This is why when I was invited to this private call some years ago, they mentioned how you have to look up your state laws, because some of the states are different in terms of how their statutes and things, by the way. But sometimes there's general uniformity when you know what you're doing and you're aware of this information. You want to look up Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case of 1938. Look up how this changed many of the court systems from color of law or colorable law into statutory de facto courts, by the way. That's still information still online, by the way. You want to look up the term legal entity, by the way. Look up legal entity. That's an actual term, by the way. Also look up not just person, but look up legal person. Not only do you want to go online, but if you do happen to have a Black's Law Dictionary, I recommend 4th or 6th edition. maybe even second edition. Sometimes you have to go far back because they play a game with the words. Look up United States, the definition of United States. You might have some versions they won't put it in, others they will. Same with natural person. They'll purposely not put it. That's why I say go online as well. There is a separate definition legally. By the way, as much as they try to hide it, this will prove to you. Don't take my word for what I'm saying. You'll see they're hiding this stuff. But look up these terms. Look up District of Columbia, by the way. Look up District of Columbia and United States. And like I said, you might not be able to find it in one particular Black's Law dictionary, or if you have a Bouvier's Law dictionary, you can use that as reference too. That is still good as well. It's good to have multiple references when you're researching and investigating. This is what a thorough researcher, investigative researcher, journalist will do to cover their tracks or basis. So I also did go over in lingus. That's what they use in the courts instead of straw man, because they're using legalese. That's a term that's used to replace plain talk. By the way, you want to look up Title 9 of United States Code, which deals with vessel of the United States. They're dealing with they combine jurisdictions. They're using admiralty or maritime. Admiralty is military, a maritime is law of the seas. When you see that flag with the gold fringe like you see in the post office, the courts, other places, that's under a certain jurisdiction. They're actually dealing with military tribunals. So there's a military part that's tied in with many of these statutory courts. That's why within the movement, there was a different process called the usufruct. And the usufruct was spelled U-S-U-F-R-U-C-T, usufruct. That was the actual term. U is in universe, S is in Sam, U is in universe, F is in Frank, R is in Robert, U is in universe, C is in cup, T is in Tom. Usufruct. Look that term up. That was a different process than what some of the other so-called gurus or people teach out there. And it dealt with the Liber codes and safe harbor, by the way, which gets into admiralty and a maritime, going back to some older codes, because there's different procedures, different methods, by the way. So I understood how that came about. So let me go to the chat again. We have in the chat, okay, Cherokee, thank you. That film I was referring to earlier, The Pursuit of Happiness. And yes, Chris Gardner, yep, that was his name. That was the name of the real life guy. Will Smith, the actor, played Chris Gardner. But the reason I told that story was I was explaining how a friend of mine was a former stockbroker and gave me the connection with the registered securities and how that's tied in with the banking finance field. It's also coded, hidden in plain sight in collegiate classes such as accounting. Finance majors take business and law as well as legal professionals. In the court system, they're using the CRIS accounts. That stands for Court Registry Investment System. That's connected to the Federal Reserve. The county deals with the CAFR funds. That stands for Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports. That's an acronym for it. You see how it's tied in with the banking system, finance. There's a correlation. You see how these disciplines overlap one another. So I stressed to a friend of mine, learning this information will just complement his discipline that he's into, which he's an expert at in survival prepping, which I, never knocked, but I always saw it as an added benefit, an added plus at the time, by the way, if you're learning this information. But thank you for that. Thomas Rodriguez says, The Pursuit of Happiness, Chris Gardner. Thank you for that as well, for confirmation. Cherokee says, much appreciated. Thank you guys for that confirmation. I couldn't think of the name of that movie. Sometimes, what they call, you have the brain farts, you go brain dead. That's why I have to, got to get the nutraceuticals, the herbs again, stay sharp. That's where the healthy foods come into play, because down the road, I may do a video, because I don't want to just be one-dimensional. We want to be versatile, because how we study is based on our diet, how we eat, what we're putting in our body. And yes, I still eat junk from time to time, but however, I go through a purging process. I have to do a better job eating more fruits, vegetables, salads. Those are good brain food. By the way, it's important for studying. Or take a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, coconut oil. You can ingest coconut oil. Not only just put it on your face for your skin. Same with black seed oil as well. Very powerful. By the way, just throwing some things out there that I personally take, have in my possession. Chlorophyll. cleans out your blood system, by the way, is important. And some of these things can help, I think, increase, don't quote me on it, your red blood cells. Vitamin B12, by the way. These are other supplements or things that I take every once in a while. I don't, may not take it every day, but there's a cleansing process. Even though I still have the coffee, because I'm on the plantation, as I call it. I'm on my second job, by the way, which hopefully one day, you know, God willing, I will be able to be free from this. It's my ultimate destiny. My destiny is to be forever free. There was a rapper named AZ that put this in his lyrics. AZ out of New York, Anthony Cruz. He was real tight with the rapper Nas. My destiny is to be forever free, by the way. Free from these plantation, this job. And I can go more in depth down the road. They're using banking. So in this video, the title I pretty much went over is like key definitions to research and quotations to investigate and research in depth. I'm trying to make sure I covered everything, my basis. Also, I don't have a problem shouting out other YouTubers. I mentioned Akeem L earlier. Big shout out to the work that brother's doing. I don't get into with some people, like one previous video I did where someone was trolling and they got into the beefs. I think different content creators have different skill sets they provide. One content creator who contacted me, she's more proficient than I am. Lady Bijou, I think she has a channel. I can't remember the name of her channel. I'll shout her out, by the way. I have to find it again, but I'm in direct contact. Big shout out to the work she's doing. By the way, she contacted me a while ago and we touched bases, and she's advanced, I would say, and she's perfected the secured party creditor process, which is a different process. I haven't used some of that in years because there's many different procedures in this movement. And she explained to me she has like over 90% success rate and was honest with me. This is how I get when I'm doing research for you guys, to bring you guys valid information. You guys might not know who I'm in touch with, heavy hitters, different people around the country. So I'm gathering valid information such as like a journalist, investigative reporter, researcher would do, or like detectives. You gather information and make sure you check it out how valid it is, by the way. So there's some heavy hitters in this. So kudos to the work she's doing. Rob Ryder, by the way, who's also fellow Michigander. Kudos to his work. Tex Mason, from what I checked, last I checked, he has a YouTube channel, had some good videos, updated processes. Yusuf L, by the way, kudos to the work he's doing. He even challenged some of the trolls out there that's people trying to discredit this information, want you to believe that their facts matter, but yet they use pseudonym names and hide behind fake accounts. Yusuf asked you all going over there, he'll take you head on and debate you. For those of you all who want limelight, that's trolling, want to debate, Yusuf was calling you guys out. Had very powerful video the other day. I was on there not too long ago. Eon, by the way, formerly Brett Drone's Legal Redress Commission. Kudos to the work he's brought to the table. Kilby Smith has high-powered, action-packed information. I noticed did a video. I didn't get a chance to check it out because there's so much information. Powerful. These are heavy hitters I'm naming. His channel was called His Advocates. He's based out west. He worked with Fred and Nina Gutierrez some years ago, by the way, as an assistant when they did private conference calls. Kudos to the work that Fred and Nina did, even though people mention how some things they feel like fail, or they mention how people went to jail. Sometimes when people come out of jail or prison, they come out more proficient. So I appreciate the research people have done. This is why I heard they shut libraries down in prisons, because they didn't want people learning this information, waking up. People were getting their freedom. They were putting liens on wardens, figuring out how to free themselves, by the way. So they limited prisoners, inmates going to libraries to study, you know, trying to free themselves, because things become serious and you have a lot of time on your hands, by the way. So I don't knock. I've actually talked 4 years ago. I had a security job in an apartment building, and I met 2 guys that overheard me because I used to spend a lot of time talking about this information over the phone, and they overheard me and sat down and had conversation. I remember one of the guys' name was Ricky. I lost contact with him. Kudos, good brother, sat down, told me how it had happened. He got caught up on a case, dealt with drugs or whatever they call trafficking and stuff, and there's commercial side to the courts behind that. There was another guy sat down So I've had former inmates talk to me. They can't stop people from talking, just like former military people that had secret security clearances, to show you how I gather information from multiple sources. And I have a good memory, by the way, so I'm able to connect the pieces and then bring it back to you guys, so you guys are empowered, given action-packed, high-powered information, by the way. But I appreciate the work people have done that have sacrificed and gone to prison, even the gurus earlier on. So don't listen to these gatekeepers, some of these trolls out here. They're trying to steer you away. They're trying to spook you away from believing that there's a valid side. There's a legitimate side. There's some information I came across where a guy gets tax write-offs for his or helps people, has a team that helps people for their paychecks for their jobs receive tax write-off. I mean, well, were they able to file if they're still operating as a 1040? I think there's a way to still protect yourself, because sometimes there can be a conflict in trying to free yourself. I won't get into all of that pertaining to status correction, but he has a procedure, and I knew about that. That actually came from a guy named David Merrill, and I think he has a channel on YouTube that deals with lawful money, by the way, and a way to their secret contracts that are hidden in plain sight. When I mentioned how some of these cabal people are so evil that they are stealing labor from us, having us on these 9-to-5 jobs, and they're not disclosing all of this information. They're using subterfuge. And Akeem El, I noticed he did a video on it. I actually talked about this in the past. Look up the definition of subterfuge. I believe it's spelled S-U-B-T-U-F-E-G-E, something like that. But if you type it in a search engine, sometimes they have a spell check will spell it for you correctly. Because by no means, it's been a minute. I don't have it written down. But look up the term subterfuge. Someone asked me, maybe S-U-B-T-E-F-U-G-E, subterfuge. It might be spelled that way. Look up subterfuge. That's what they're using. The cabal. They're hiding in plain sight, because they use other entities to interface in the public. By the way, I won't get into, but you can read between the lines, some of you all who are advanced. And I have talked about advanced information, but I'm going over stuff that's important for newbies to connect the dots. And most importantly, before I get ready to shut this video down, I'm going to go over something else. So I shouted out different channels. I went over Akeem El, Jonah Bay, Yusuf El, Tex Mason, Eon, Kelby Smith's channels called His Advocates. I noticed he did a brief video I checked out with Boris. Boris was connected to that usufruct process. And there were some successes with that, I believe, in my opinion, which was similar to some secured party creditor process, but it had some differences. Dealt with reversionary interest, where you're putting, you're making the courts the fiduciary. You're making them responsible, by the way. So you're putting the onus on them, by the way. You can read between the lines. It's like you're giving them the hot potato. So I'm going to go, before I shut things down, by the way, I want to have some action-packed information for you guys, let you guys know I'm still here. Something is very important. If you call yourself a U.S. citizen, because I was going to touch on this earlier, but a friend of mine was concerned about, that asked me, he wanted to be assured that this information will work for him. And I get into even April or June that said this is not a one-size-fits-all. There's no silver bullets when you're dealing with this type of information. There is, and then at the same time there isn't. Depends on how advanced you are. If you do meet an elite or somebody that's willing to pull you through, they may evaluate you first before they decide to teach you all the information, by the way, because some people have just been blessed and life has literally been handed to them on a silver platter. My mother used to tell me years ago, life is not handed to you on a silver platter. But to come to find out years later, for some people, it literally is. They have the silver platter. They were sent to private schools by invitation only. They were taught by their parents, and it was exclusive. Even some people are initiated, were sent to private seminars by invitation only, where they learned about private trust through the Bahamas, Hawaii, by invitation only. Panama, remember Panama Papers came out? I won't touch on all that, but there's things I know, by the way. So some people they were raised top middle class. They didn't have it as hard as some of us, you or I, blue collar workers, at a grassroots level, to kind of provide clarification. But most importantly, before I shut this video down, for those of you all who are still watching, thank you for joining me. You are currently watching Dorsey's Resource. I'm doing a video on key terminologies, key definitions to research and investigate. Quotations. I went over a lot of action-packed information. The video will be uploaded after this video goes live. The last most important thing I'm going over, if you call yourself a U.S. citizen, a friend of mine was worried how fast could he, if he decided to do this, he wanted to be assured. And I say a lot of people ask that question. You know, will this work for me? And I want to tell you, this has to be something you have to evaluate, make your own assessment. And I didn't go over as much as what processes have worked. I went over secretly something I did with my job in reference to Title 26, Section 3402, subsection P. I won't get into the specifics, but that's all you need pretty much, Title 26, Section 3402. I had success with one of my previous employers and even current one, by the way. And this other company been doing 2 jobs as of lately. By the way, other company I'm subcontracting with, by the way, just to provide more clarification, so there's not a conflict of interest there. Just putting that out there in reference to, but how we contract, it's important. By the way, how you engage in contracts is very important. The Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 declared if someone calls himself a United States citizen, you are can be legally considered an enemy of the state. So people who are worried about being put on a list, a watch list, a lot of United States citizens, this is a secret heavy jewel. This is so powerful. This spooks and scares some people. And I hate to tell you folks, there's they put you in contracts without your permission. And it all started with the birth certificate. By the way, freedom is not free. Freedom. It's a difference between being free versus freedom. Because Jordan Maxwell talked about years ago, he was a researcher slash historian that talked about the Statute of Liberty. Liberty, you think, it's a legal term. That's what a sailor gets. They're granted, actually, it means permission. When on a Navy ship, when they have the thing where the controllers that are on ground that guide the jets in on those ships, and they get the signal, that's liberty, which is permission. By the way, similar concept. So when you see the Statue of Liberty, she's holding the torch up. By the way, that doesn't mean what you think, freedom. That means that deals with actually permission. It's like if you ask your parents, let's say before you become of age, you want to go on a date for the first time. You're 16 or you just got your license, and you ask permission. Liberty is permission. Jordan Maxwell explained that. Many contracts we get involved with pertain to the court system that deals with legalese. They have legal implications to them. So we're thinking one thing, the way we've been programmed, we've been taught, it has a different implication. So I'm providing more clarification the way I'm breaking this down for you guys. And much of this goes back to Roman law. Even the time, a concept years ago where a sailor, this is where the birth certificate concept gets, when a ship pulled into a dock, they got what was called, the captain of the port authority had to provide what was called a certificate of manifest. The captain had to provide this for the port authority at the time. The people who were in charge of the ships coming in, by the way, and it was called berthing through a canal when they parked at a dock. And he said these concepts have came down the road. That's why even when you're late for work, they say they're going to dock your pay. Or you have what's called a doc that deals with doctor, and he has to get the birth certificate. A lot of these concepts go back to water law, which is connected to admiralty, which is military, and maritime is law of the seas. These jurisdictions have been combined with one another, and that's a concept that's called birthing, by the way. It was called a certificate. That's why he compared it to our driver's license. At the time, the captain of the ship had to provide the ship's weight, the color of the ship, the weight of it, similar to your driver's license, has your eye color, your height, your weight, when you were born. By the way, just FYI for you guys to get these concepts and clarifications. So I want to thank you guys for continuing to follow me so far, but I just want to provide better clarification for you all, and understanding this information before I shut things down. But many people who are concerned or worried about being put on a watch list, if you call yourself a U.S. citizen, that's a corporate jurisdictional term. Look up the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, by the way. The Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, it was further re-implemented after the bankruptcy of 1933. And notice the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 was set up after the Federal Reserve Act was put in place in 1913. Some of this is actually taught in college classes, by the way. I took economics. Even though I didn't finish on my bachelor's, I have an associate's degree in business administration from Davenport University. By the way, I actually had enough credits to actually be a substitute teacher at one time. By the way, when I used to be stationed, I used to work for a security company at a particular school in Dearborn. And I met some of the administrators there at that particular location. It was like a middle school / elementary school. And they invited me in. One of the administrators had to connect because I already knew about this. All you needed was like 100 credit hours. But I had already had an associate's, and I was 13 classes away from a bachelor's degree. So I've taken some of this information I've learned about in college. My economics class talked about the Federal Reserve. Both my economics teachers at the time were responsible for writing the book, because when I looked up who writes business and law, which I did a video previously about, where some of this information is encrypted and coded within business and law through several chapters. There's one chapter that deals with it's called commercial paper, and that deals with negotiable instruments, site drafts, which some people tried to say were illegal, but they're supposed to be secretly processed through the Treasury Tax and Loan Department, which the Federal Reserve has not been disclosing, because see, we're really supposed to be dealing with the Treasury. The Federal Reserve is acting as a third party, by the way, and there's some things coming down the road. Since I'm limited on time, by the way, I won't go into details about because I didn't intend to be before you guys that long. I try to be concise and not as long-winded, but this information is very important, by the way, and getting into. So look up the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, the Emergency War Powers Act of 1933 was when this was executed, and I also mentioned the Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case in 1938, how that ties in. A lot of these things in the Securities Act, Social Security, notice these things were all around the same time period. If you look up the Social Security Act of 1933 or 1934 or maybe 1935, but within the same similar time period, even the Securities Act, by the way, this is important. Even in the movie Wizard of Oz, I touched on this in the past. This information was encrypted and coded within the movie Wizard of Oz, and the movie was based off the book. Similar to Hunger Games, how the Hunger Games was based off books by Susan Collins. In the movie Wizard of Oz, Dorothy had silver slippers. So when she followed the yellow brick road, that symbolized, when the book was written in 1914, that symbolized that silver following the gold out the country. By the way, Dorothy had silver slippers. Now in the movie, obviously she had red slippers, which stood for your wet ink signature, which is if you're using red ink. Notice a lot of teachers, when they take rank over the students, they act as a shepherd guarding his sheep. They take rank and they use red ink, by the way, which red is actually by blood. Some people try to say excuse, it won't show up on copier machines, but if it's fine red ink, it can still show up, just like blue ink, by the way. But red stood for like your wedding signature. They were pertaining. So when the Wicked Witch, when she wanted Toto, Toto is an Italian word for total. That means all, everything. That's Italian, which Latin, there's a connection. It's a Latin word for all. You can look it up, everything. That's what the dog Toto represented. Even these terms were encrypted. Tin Man stood for your tax identification number. T-I-N, Tin Man. It was also other symbolizations. Scarecrows obviously stood for straw man. By the way, so a lot of this I won't get into. You can look up online, and Cowardly Lion represented Americans who lose their courage and fighting or trying to combat they feel the system that's wronged them, by the way, or not understanding that this was all encoded, because see, they get you subconsciously. It's hiding in plain sight. I forget what they call it in the military. They have a term, sometimes it's used for covert operations, hiding in plain sight. And they put a lot of these things because the elites still need to use loopholes to interface with the public. That's why once you learn their system, they won't change. Even though they update stuff, you get the proper blueprint or the 444. They're not going to change things that they still have to use or go by. It's just learning the secrets, by the way. So if people worried about being put on a watch list, if you call yourself a U.S. citizen, mind you, they want you to be a good citizen. Vote. Be a registered voter. It's the difference between registration and recording. That's another thing I've had success with, by the way. When people say, Dorsey, what have you done? I forgot to mention, because I was supposed to get into that for you guys. My story. I'm not a registered voter. I have not been since 2004, even though I still stay politically astute. Now, I will say this. I respect the process of it for people who are public that don't understand. And there's another concept where some of my own people say, well, your ancestors died for the right to vote, but they didn't know there was a difference between civil rights and human rights. I won't get into all of that. And I actually have some notes that I compiled a long time ago to a rebuttal for that. By the way, a lot of people agreed with me. And notice that this campaign that uses a lot of civil rights, they have a human rights. But human rights actually deals with common law. There's actually a bill under the United Nations, but the system public side is still using statutory stuff. So they're still pulling you in jurisdiction when you're accepting these benefit privileges, by the way. There's other things I can break off that piggyback that go more in depth. I'm just keeping it concise. Some of you all who are advanced know what I'm referring to, by the way, because I'm getting ready to shut this video down. I want to thank you guys that are still watching, still joining. But the concept is you want to be free. By the way, so they've entrapped you. You call yourself a U.S. citizen. You are on a unofficial watch list, or they can certain movies they put it in secretly. There's another movie that Will Smith played in called I Am Legend, I believe. The movie where he was trying to get his wife on a helicopter. Just go to that scene in the movie where she was with his son, and don't want to spoil it for you, but. By him being a commanding officer, he took rank in the caste system. He was a general. He was able to order the lower level people to let her through the checkpoint because there was like a virus or something that was happening, but there was tied in with the zombies or the other creatures. There's kind of a correlation. But notice what's interesting. You have something nowadays, I won't say the name, that's an outbreak overseas, by the way. So something could happen, say if things got out of hand over here. And if you're at a certain status, you will be protected. That's all I'll leave it at. So the elites won't destroy or hurt the system, very system they use. They have set up a banker. I went through a Shelf Corporation class years ago, mentioned that too, by the way. When he was sharing some of the secrets, a vice president of Chase Bank, I won't say his name, by the way. I went through these private classes some years ago. And that's what he clarified. Those who are scared, who are spooked, they say, oh no, I'm scared. Oh, that information, that sovereign citizen stuff. No, stay away from that. No, I talk about there's a legitimate side that's real, that is valid. That's what I discuss. I don't talk about the hearsay. If you are into fiction, I talk about non-fiction, factual information, truthful. There's no problem if you're into fiction, you know. But over here, you're going to get facts, credible stuff that I've researched, vetted. So let me get to the chat before I shut things down. A few more acknowledgments. Money Boy came in at 1:03 p.m. I didn't see you, Money Boy. Money Boy in the building, fam. I got to give Money Boy a shout out, by the way. Says you up early. Cherokee says affidavit. By the way, Cherokee says yes, indeed. Chucky Trana says you are supposed to be a third-party intervener on behalf of the debtor. There is a bid bond, performance bond, and payment bond on every case. Yes, you are correct. Thank you for that information, Chucky. Says if you don't pay, the prosecutor has to pay, which means you get locked up and they lien your exemption account. Yes, the information is all hidden in plain sight. People would just rather watch sports. Yes, that is true, by the way. And that's why I encourage you, even for myself, I get on myself because I'm guilty of this. We all can like the junk food, just want to kick back because I love sports as well. Basketball is one of my favorite sports, but I watch golf, football, tennis from time to time, just like with music. By the way, I won't get into all my favorites. Gymnastics too, by the way, I forget. I used to do backflips. I was known for being an acrobat years ago, so I pay attention to gymnastics. That's why I knew when I follow Nadia Comaneci, by the way, I knew the history about her from watching the Olympics years ago with Bob Costas. So I was a fan of gymnastics since I used to do no-hand backflips years ago on a side note. And I also did martial arts with there's a sport aspect. So Chucky's right when in his comment. He says some people will rather watch sports and don't want to study. That's why I encourage you guys, buy the updated material. The webinars and stuff are very important, by the way. Thank you for that. Aloha, Dorsey, you're awesome. Thank you, Tony Benson Mahuka. House of Nathan, both of them says, can you ask for a custodial bond? Chucky Trana says the N-Lingus is a U.S. citizen. Yes, someone clarify it. It's just another way of explaining it. By the way, the straw man, because some people didn't understand this. When I was invited to a particular conference call, I won't say the name, when I was working with this someone, and I was trying to clarify, they were confusing it with, I said, that's where the term resident and address, they tie you in the jurisdiction, because the straw man is actually a separate entity. But people that are gatekeepers that work for the state don't understand it. Many of these concepts, by the way. So just keep that in mind. They don't understand, you know, what the difference is. But yeah, that's the artificial being that's been set up. You want to act as a custodian. There's different terms. Custodian, trustee. That's why I went over definitions. Look up executor, custody, custodian. Notice these words have some similarities to not just job professions, but a legal side, a legal implication. That's separate, by the way. You have a difference between regular Webster's dictionary, what we were taught in grammar, versus the legal side. So yes, you want to take custody or ownership. There's different processes, different procedures. By the way, not all roads are the same. Just like all freeways. If you decide to take whatever freeway to your liking, if you decide to take the regular road or 696 or 75, it's to your liking. You know, people have different preferences. This is why I say everyone has to make their own assessment and evaluation. It's also why I give a disclaimer. And I did mention that adhesion contracts a while ago. I actually did a video about that, Chucky Tronic, so thank you. Rescind them. Yes, you can do that as well. Rescind these contracts. Transporting the N-Lingus is a commercial activity, private commercial paper, light commercial paper. Tony Mahuka Benson says, you are amazingly full of knowledge. Love listening to you. Thank you, Tony Henson, for the compliment. Namaste. Kudos to you. John Doe says, of 90 and 91, 28 with the trust indenture, you need to do a restoration of rights and probate court surrogate. Thank you. I have heard about that. That's higher level stuff. By the way, with that being said, guys, this is my first time doing a video at my other job, by the way. So I am working a second job. That's why I'm here before you guys during the day. I want to thank you all. You can subscribe to me, follow me at Dorsey's Resource. I'm on Facebook. If you want to subscribe to me on YouTube, make sure you hit the notification bell in the lower right hand corner. By the way, so whenever I put out new videos, you'll get updates. I'm also on minds.com. I'm on Twitter, by the way, at Dorsey's Resource. I'm also on Instagram. Instagram and Twitter, I'm not on there as much, even with Facebook, but my latest videos, whenever I put out new videos, if you follow me on Facebook, you'll see it may notify you if you get the updates, not just from YouTube. You'll have another backup way, by the way, for notification. So just keep that in mind. If you do follow me on Facebook, I have 2 different Dorsey's Resource Facebook accounts. So with that being said, guys, stay woke. Rest in peace to Kobe Bryant. We had a lot of things that happened recently. I was thinking about doing a video. I was a fan of Kobe, by the way, years ago, real big fan. Was devastating to hear the news. It was actually a day before my surgery that was scheduled January 27th on a Monday, which went well. So I was shook that night. I'll be straight up with you guys. Hearing the news, I got a phone call from a good friend of mine that left a message, and I was just in utter disbelief. But Black Mamba, rest in peace to you. I'll say also Nipsey Hussle in that same area. The marathon continues, guys. I'm your host, John Dorsey at Dorsey's Resource. Until next time, guys, deuces.